Section 3. The market is round. What does the market look like? Going through all the classical theories of the West, none of them gives an accurate answer. In people's minds, the market is something mysterious. The treatment of concepts in modern classical theory has, on the surface, been growing clearer and more accurate. Yet every concept eventually falls back on a single starting point, the invisible hand. To take one example, the traditional classical definition of the industry chain is a concept made up of 4 dimensions, namely the value chain, the enterprise chain, the supply-demand chain, and the spatial chain. These 4 dimensions form an industry chain through a process of mutual coupling in equilibrium. This coupling mechanism is the internal pattern by which the industry chain comes about. As a kind of objective regularity, it acts like an invisible hand regulating how the industry chain forms. The essence of the industry chain is the description of a group of enterprises that have a certain inner connection. This formulation is long and elaborate. It also turns the actual controller of the industry chain into God. Once God is in charge, different people read it differently, and argument follows. Examples of this kind are scattered widely through the classical Western theory of the market. A theoretical system with the invisible hand as its foundation is plainly further from science, not closer. To get a breakthrough in our understanding of the market, we may as well first break the conceptual lock of rule by God. Examining the market from a wholly new vantage, lifting the veil from God's face, will bring us pleasant surprises we did not expect. From the macroscopic angle, capital and savings are the 2 sides of the same coin of money. They depend on each other. Capital reinforces itself, savings weaken themselves. Suppose at the outset that capital and savings are 2 equal parallel lines. The growth rate of capital then runs faster than the growth rate of savings. Over time, money bends naturally and forms a circle with capital on the outside and savings on the inside. This is the outline of the market as derived from the macroscopic side. By the same logic, since capital is a cumulative value while GDP is an instantaneous value, the rate of growth that capital eventually demands in returns, V1, is greater than the rate of GDP growth, V2, and the rate of GDP growth, V2, is in turn greater than the growth rate of saturated industries, V3. It follows that the rate of return required by capital, V1, is greater than the growth rate of saturated industries, V3. The required return of capital is passed into the operating cost of society. The operating cost of society is in turn passed on to industry through labor cost and land rent. In saturated industries, then, the rate of cost growth exceeds the rate of revenue growth. Under the pressure of this model, an industry naturally forms a wrapping of operating cost, the return required by capital, around its revenue. The industry chain curls of its own accord and forms a closed circular structure. This structure we call monopoly. We can also prove this closed circular structure from the microscopic angle by tracing the path along which the market actually runs. Take an example. For a Chinese domestic lubricant company to supply a particular model of car to a motor vehicle manufacturer, it must first complete certification by the American Petroleum Institute (API), the European Automobile Manufacturers Association (ACEA), the International Lubricant Specification Advisory Committee (ILSA), and the manufacturer's OEM certification. All of these certifications are carried out strictly to engine rig test standards. The certification process takes a great deal of money and time. By the time the certifications are complete and supply might just be starting, the model that was certified is already entering its end-of-production phase. New upgraded models are coming out. The new model's grade of oil calls for a fresh round of certification work from the lubricant company. So before the supplier has recovered its investment from the first round, the second round of losses begins. In practice, the whole thing is a bottomless pit. And in theoretical terms, it locks the domestic Chinese lubricant company out of the carmaker's system and the 4S after-sales system. By contrast, the in-house oil arm of a multinational holds a permanent advantage. Because European, American, and Japanese technology generally runs 3 to 5 years ahead of China, the whole of the certification has already been completed in the multinational's home market, and the cost of certification inside China is 0. This advantage holds in perpetuity. On top of that, when a car maker chooses its lead supplier, it operates on a double standard. German cars use German oil, American cars use American oil, Japanese and Korean cars use Japanese and Korean oil. The core technology of Chinese domestic car makers is still not held by the Chinese car makers themselves, so their procurement standards still follow international practice. Inside this rule system, the domestic Chinese lubricant company carries the same certification cost but can capture only a small share of the regional Chinese market. This structure, in which right and duty do not match, leaves the domestic lubricant brand condemned to play second fiddle, a fate it finds very hard to escape. Continuing losses are not sustainable. When the OEM channel cannot be made to work, the lubricant brand can only fall back on the public distribution channel. The distribution system led by 4S dealerships and Authorize ad repair stations also requires the carmaker's OEM certification. The brand goes around a full circle and ends up back at the carmaker, still needing to complete OEM certification together with the API, ACEA, ILSAC, and other third-party certifications synchronized with OEM. The entire channel is a closed, dead loop. The blockage at the sales end leaves the company's base oil R&D with no direction. Even if the sales channel is opened up for a while, the carmaker's procurement specification has already named the base oil supplier, for example, SK Group 3 hydroprocessed base oil from Korea. Along this path, the route for foundational R&D is, in practice, already locked off. Under this arrangement, R&D becomes ornamental for lack of demand. High-end base oil production stays permanently in its infancy. The harder one tries to catch up, the wider the gap behind grows. It is as if an invisible hand has tied the brand firmly onto the low-end track. The brand has strength but cannot apply it. Something feels wrong, and yet nobody knows where the problem lies. This is the shared feeling of the sales, R&D, and production departments of this firm. The motor vehicle industry is a knowledge-intensive industry and a core area of manufacturing. The problem this lubricant company has run into looks like an isolated case, but on closer analysis, the problem the whole of Chinese manufacturing has run into is the same problem. There is a form of leadership called time. Leadership built on time cannot be caught up to. The Americans did not lead because they overtook the British on the coal and steam engine industry chain. They led because they set their own rules on the oil and internal combustion engine industry chain. Logically, when we take the multinational as our model and our successful example, we are treating the multinational's present as our future. A person cannot win a contest against their own future. If we cannot catch up, how do we surpass? The follower has to throw off the way of thinking of the leader, the monopolist. The follower has to step out of the track the leader has set and allocate resources according to what the objective requires. The next question is how to locate the track the leader has set. Only by finding the existing track and by making the track the leader stands on clear, quantifiable, and measurable can we find the track of innovation. Following the industry chain way of thinking, if we benchmark a Chinese domestic lubricant company against Mobil, Shell, BP, Castrol, and the rest, we find that what these multinationals share is a leading whole-chain net profit margin. Whole-chain leading means that the multinational itself has the leading net profit margin, and that its suppliers, its distributors, and its endpoints all have leading net profit margins. At the same time, the multinational's commercial customers are aspirational buyers with potential, and its private customers belong to the high-end consumer group. A supply system with leading margins, a sales system with leading margins, and a customer base with leading margins together build a closed mesh. Chinese manufacturing, fighting on its home ground, is not facing a single opponent. It is facing an environment, a closed circulatory system. Inside the mesh the multinational has built, the contest between Chinese manufacturing and the system with leading net margins is a war between an individual and a group. The probability of winning is close to zero. The road Chinese manufacturing has walked is a road the multinational has already walked. Every cost at every link of Chinese manufacturing is transparent to the multinational. The multinational can therefore work out, with great clarity, the marginal cost and the profit of Chinese manufacturing, and make sure that the profit Chinese manufacturing earns is not enough to support innovation. To cope with this, Chinese privately owned enterprises have largely resorted to squeezing their staff in order to hold a margin, and this brings on a second bad effect. Staff are kept running to keep up, with very little freedom of their own. This further locks down the probability of individual innovation. The operating cost of society is a cost element a single enterprise cannot control. A rise in this cost is bound to bring a rise in the operating cost of the whole industry. The total net profit of the industry then falls continuously. The flood of cost swallows up the net profit margin of the whole industry. Only the enterprise with the leading whole chain net profit margin escapes the flood. This has nothing to do with the enterprise's size. The larger an enterprise, the larger the share of industry cost it carries, and the larger its market risk. The only enterprise without risk is the one with the leading net profit margin. The flood of social costs does not drown every enterprise. The enterprise with the leading net margin may not be the largest, but its elevation is far higher than that of the size leader. When the flood roars, the size leaders run into continuous losses. That moment becomes the moment when the net margin leader takes market share. The industry's crisis turns into the leader's opportunity. Chinese enterprises face another problem. They think on a flat surface, and they always try to solve every problem once and for all. They put big and strong into the same bag. They ignore the objective fact that the larger the scale, the larger the share of total industry cost the firm carries. When the operating cost of society shoots up, the flood of cost rapidly swallows up the size-leading firm and pushes it to the edge of bankruptcy. In the eyes of Chinese enterprises, PetroChina is exceptionally powerful. The real objective situation is that PetroChina is a firm at permanent risk of going under. Oil at $100 a barrel is not the normal state of things. Once oil falls to $30, PetroChina's revenue is cut in half, while its cost cannot fall in step. Its current net margin is only about 5%. Suppose revenue is 100%, combined cost is 95%, and net margin is 5%. When oil prices halve, revenue slides quickly to 50%, while combined cost cannot easily fall below 50%, which means continuing losses. A sudden collapse in oil prices also means that the firm's assets shrink rapidly, so selling assets is not enough to cover the loss. At that point, the larger PetroChina is, the larger its loss, and the shorter the time it can hold out in the crisis. China has not yet been through a real crisis, so Chinese enterprises generally link big with strong. The real objective is that big and strong are two completely different concepts. In a consumer-led market, the pricing power of the market is held by the firm with the leading net profit margin. The net margin leader can direct the flood of social operating costs towards the size leader. The size leader cannot direct the flood at the net margin leader. The same situation applies in other markets. Take the American automotive aftermarket. The 1970s saw the completion of urbanization in the United States. In 1973, oil prices rose sharply, and consumers had a strong need to save on outlay. Jiffy Lube began with a single shop and grew over the following decade or so into one of the largest car maintenance chains in America. Jiffy Lube grew fast because in the after-sales system led by the car makers, maintenance was treated as a technical trade with a high labor-hour charge that wasted the consumer's time and also wasted Jiffy Lube's own time and various overheads. In the Jiffy Lube quick oil change model, maintenance was treated as a non-technical trade. The various lengthy formalities and the long waits were removed. Only non-technical labor hours were charged. The cost of maintenance fell sharply. If the cost of maintenance in the car maker's after-sales unit is taken as 100, Jiffy Lube's cost is only 70. Jiffy Lube's price set between 75 and 95 gives a clear price advantage over the car maker's after-sales unit. Jiffy Lube and its peers, by being efficient and helping consumers save money, took the pricing power of the market and became the leading market force. America moved from a repair era into a maintenance market. The American automotive aftermarket therefore shrank, and consumers had to pay much less. With the rise of maintenance chains like Jiffy Lube, Napa rose as a one-stop supplier to the maintenance chains. In the crisis, Napa's share price moved in the opposite direction from Ford's. In 1979, oil prices surged again, and AutoZone set up its first auto parts store. In AutoZone's parts store, the labor hour charges for an oil change, a tire change, and a routine service were all cleared to zero. The consumer could pick up the tools straight from AutoZone's store and complete the oil change, the tire change, and so on themselves. AutoZone also sold repair tools to the consumer. AutoZone's core advantage came from being closer to one-stop. The difference between one-stop service and separated specialized service is this. The former calls for far lower rent and staff outlay. To serve the same 100,000 car owners, the rent paid under the Specialized Ed model is 10, while the rent paid under the one-stop model is only 1. The same applies to staff cost and other costs. It was on this absolute cost advantage that AutoZone rose at speed. Jiffy Lube and its peers began to decline. Jiffy Lube was bought up by Pennzoil, the leading American motor oil brand and the brand closest to swallowing the whole industry chain. The acquisition let Jiffy Lube cut a certain share of procurement cost, but market evolution did not stop because of it. On the motor oil industry chain, Mobil had a hard time matching the independent lubricant companies, Pennzoil and Quaker State, on conventional mineral oil. The independents, with their greater flexibility and a richer set of marketing techniques, became the leaders of the American motor oil market. In 1973, the oil price surge opened a door for Mobil, which launched Mobil 1, a fully synthetic motor oil. Mobil 1 looked dearer at the till, but its oil change interval was twice that of conventional mineral oil, which saves the consumer one oil change labor hour. Provided synthetic oil reached volume production, it was bound to show an absolute advantage over mineral oil. The price of synthetic oil, which looks higher, is in real terms lower. The facts bore this out. Mobil's lead in synthetic oil gradually gave it the leading net profit margin on the motor oil industry chain. It successfully pushed the motor oil channel cost burden onto Pennzoil. Pennzoil moved into the red and was forced to merge with Quaker State, another scale-leading oil company. The merged firm cut the number of terminals and middle links sharply and restored its profit. The flood of social operating costs, however, kept spreading upwards. In the end, it overflowed the profit boundary of the Pennzoil, Quaker, Jiffy Lube combined company as well. The combination was eventually acquired by Shell. The whole chain of oil, lubricant, and aftermarket was joined up. The channel was again merged and restructured. Jiffy Lube, the first mover, was kidnapped by its own specialization and never managed to expand toward the one-stop side. Quick oil change was its signature, and that signature forced a single line of business to carry the same rent and staff cost that competitors carried for a much broader offering. This is the root reason why Jiffy Lube, even after being acquired by Shell, has had difficulty recovering its profit. The later mover, Mobil, by contrast, named its aftermarket unit Mobil Auto Care. The scope of auto care service shows a 1+1 form of innovation. A structural advantage of this kind cannot be reversed by individual effort. The 1+1 form means that the consumer's share of rent and staff cost is smaller. Today, the crown of North America's leading maintenance chain has long since been taken by Walmart. Mobil's Auto Care has grown to over 4,000 stores across North America and the Asia Pacific. Looking across the evolution of America's automotive aftermarket, we see that only the firm that maximizes the consumer's savings and that makes the existing market smaller earns market recognition and earns the pricing power of the market. The future is efficient and cheap. The future is also monopoly. Strip away all the dazzling packaging and every cost is in the end a labor cost. The total employment in the aftermarket decides the efficiency of the industry. From the angle of the automotive aftermarket, the AutoZone model, with zero intermediaries and a one-stop offering, can in real terms save the consumer far more than any other model. From the angle of the whole of retail, Walmart's degree of one-stop coverage runs far ahead of AutoZone's. The former's business module contains the latter's. The former, although it moved later, eventually wins. Step outside bricks and mortar, and we find that Amazon's one-stop coverage outruns Walmart's. Monopoly is what we complain about, and yet monopoly is the inevitable result of how a market develops. Only monopoly can wring the unnecessary cost of communication out of the market, achieve scale and consolidation, and reach the goal of saving the consumer the most. AutoZone and Walmart had a further reason for their success. they could move Chinese goods, that is, cheap labor, into America for sale. Looking across the whole arc of the American market, the after-sales channels owned by the American carmakers certainly had the funds and the strength to build their own specially Z maintenance chains, yet they did not. Jiffy Lube clearly had the strength to build its own parts stores, and it did not. Napa had the capacity to build the AutoZone model, and Napa did not either. On the motor oil industry chain, Pennzoil, Mobil, and Shell all had the capacity and the opportunity to build the AutoZone model. None of them did. Why? The answer is that every one of these firms fell into the same benchmarking trap built by core competence thinking. The enterprise stares at its competitor. It thinks all the time about pulling more money out of the consumer's pocket. It never thinks about helping the consumer save money on its own initiative. It treats I, as I am now, as reasonable. It is this way of thinking which puts the interest of the enterprise, the self, in the place of God, that turns a better-positioned firm into a blind person. The future will blossom in the direction in which the consumer is God. The future contains the present. It is closer to one stop. It has fewer intermediaries. If Chinese enterprises can throw off the confinement of flat thinking and core competence thinking and find the point at which they can both save the consumer money and lead on net profit margin, then that point is where the track of the future exists. From there, they can gradually pull the whole industry chain they sit on into a new track. Take the same lubricant company again. If this firm sheds the confinement of mainstream thinking and stops pursuing a breakthrough in the mainstream channel, it can then boldly buy in Mobil's fully synthetic base oil and the additives from Infinium, the joint venture between Mobil and Shell, and produce a fully synthetic motor oil of the best quality. Sold through the internet channel, its production cost is around 120 yuan for a 4-liter pack, the same throughout, while comparable products retail between 300 and 500 yuan. If sold only through Byte2C e-commerce, this lubricant brand can be priced at half the competitor's level, around 100 yuan. Performance is roughly the same, the price is half. With even a modest push, the product will sell hot, because the product speaks for itself. Through the new channel, the lubricant company can offload the historical burdens of certification cost, carmakers' profit requirement, 4S dealership rent, marketing cost, promotional cost, and so on onto the multinational. Once free of the high-cost binding of the traditional channel, even with retail price down by 50%, the product's net profit margin can be above 25%, a sharp rise far higher than the net profit margin of the rival Mobil 1. Mobil 1 sells in the traditional channel and the new channel at the same time, and its cost has to be averaged across both. So although multinationals like Mobil lead in technology and in scale of synthetic oil production, their net profit margin is locked by the traditional channel between 5% and 10%. Provided the lubricant company steps off the established track of thought and chooses the new channel, innovation happens of its own accord. The result of innovation is a shared win for the company and the consumer. Because Mobil's sales center of gravity sits in the traditional channel, no matter how the Chinese domestic lubricant company provokes Mobil in the new channel, Mobil dare not strike back. Mobil knows clearly that the first thing a counterattack would destroy is its own traditional channel. The channel Mobil has built up with great care over more than a decade and with more than 1 billion yuan in investment. To put it in numbers, Mobil has 10 sons. 9 are in the traditional channel, 1 is in the new channel. Even if the Chinese domestic lubricant company beats the youngest son to a pulp in the new channel, Mobil cannot strike back. Mobil's hands are tied to time bombs, and beside the bombs stand its 9 sons. To strike back is to blow up 9 sons it has raised at great cost. So the track on which the strongest brand in an industry logically dare not strike back is the track of innovation. Once one occupies the track of innovation, a breakthrough follows by necessity. The firm on the track of innovation, by being efficient, has won the pricing power of the market. The result of innovation should be high quality at a low price. We have already noted that the market for motor oil approaches 100 billion yuan. Capturing only a few percentage points lets the lubricant company earn enough profit and volume to support its R&D and production of fully synthetic base oil. Then comes channel building and the R&D and production of synthetic industrial oil. This forms the effect of one point pulls another point. The points join into a line. The firm ends up with a leading net profit margin across the whole chain. In the old market, Mobil's net profit was far ahead of the domestic Chinese lubricant brands, so the flood of social cost could only drown the domestic brands. Step off the old track. The domestic lubricant company's net profit margin overtakes Mobil's. The situation reverses. The flood of social cost begins to be directed at Mobil. This case has general application. The rise of the Taobao brands has the same cause. Innovation should mean saving the consumer money to the greatest extent, not forcing on the consumer packaging and specialized services the consumer does not need. On the foundation of a clearly leading net profit margin with a properly chosen low-cost marketing approach, brand operations begin to flow like water. The consumer, sharing in the benefit of innovation, that is, in quality at low price, becomes the brand's biggest supporter and free promoter. Specialization, marketing, and packaging are the results of innovation, not the causes of it. Many Chinese enterprises have fallen into the trap of specializing for the sake of specializing, refining for the sake of refining, marketing for the sake of marketing, and packaging for the sake of packaging. Ignoring the consumer's interest, the enterprise can only wait to die. In this case, we introduce the concept of a flood of cost. In the picture our minds usually carry, the industry chain is straight and stretches out without limit. The case above shows that if the chain were straight, no dead loop could arise. The fact that a closed dead loop did arise, with the brands stuck inside the carmaker's OEM circle, shows that the industry chain is not straight, is annular, otherwise it could not close. By the same logic, if the lubricant brand chooses a new channel, the new channel is closed too. The process of joining points into a line is the process of closing an industry chain. So we can broadly say that the industry chain is curved and closed. Following the annular structure further, we find we can travel from the oil industry to agriculture, and from agriculture to oil. We can travel from the motor industry to the steel industry, and from steel to motor. We can travel from coal to shipbuilding, and from shipbuilding to coal. We can travel from manufacturing to logistics, and from logistics to production. We can travel from services to manufacturing, and from manufacturing to services. The connections between industries are not single-point connections. From any point in any industry, one can reach any point in any other industry. The surface that the closed industry chains actually build up is a spherical surface, very close in shape to the Earth. The cross-influences between industries are transmitted through the labor cost, the rent, and the operating cost of society that each industry carries. These influences move in the same direction. To take an example, house prices push up the cost of living for teachers. The education industry is bound to use methods such as extra paid tutoring to grow its revenue and pass the cost on. The farmer, faced with the rising cost of educating his children, raises the price of grain. The price of grain pushes up the teacher's cost of living again. This is a positive reinforcing cycle in which the influences run in the same direction. House prices, education costs, and grain prices rise. The cost of living of white-collar workers and doctors and others rises with them. White-collar workers tighten their packaging and sell their products at a premium to expand their own revenue. Doctors raise their medical incomes to pass on their cost of living. The cross-influences between the groups move in the same direction. Once one point is pulled up, every other point rises in step. The operating cost of society is measured at its highest point. The highest point itself is being cross-pushed up without stop. On the other hand, if more and more enterprises innovate in the direction of quality at low price, the consumer's cost of living falls continuously. The rise in life freedom pushes up the innovative capacity of staff, which in turn helps innovation a step further. If we look at the operating cost of society as a sea level, the difference between the sea level of human society and the sea level of nature is this. The sea level of nature is a constant value. The sea level of human society is a value that keeps rising. No individual, no enterprise, no institution can control the height of this sea level. The only choice the individual, the enterprise, and the institution have left is to raise their own net profit margin. When innovation is locked, the operating cost of society rises without stop. People resort to overwork and to adding water to the goods and services they offer, and they jointly push the sea level higher. The efficiency of society moves into negative growth. Industriousness leads to poverty is the typical mark of this stage. In the process above, through microscopic derivation, we again arrive at the conclusion that the market is round or spherical. The value of this conclusion is that we can simplify the unlimited number of variables of Western classical theory into a single pair of opposing, measurable variables. Innovation is not necessarily high technology. The aim of innovation is to make goods of high quality at low price and to open the track of falling prices. The direction of innovation is to jump onto an outer track. The direction is not to squeeze further into the inner circle, that is, not to set up inefficient monopolies, raise prices, attach to power, and cultivate connections. The real advantage of the late mover is the absence of the burden of the traditional circle, and the absence of any obligation to carry the corrupted high cost of the traditional channel. In a society led by innovation, what the whole society sees as the direction of innovation is consistent. Once that consistency is reached, even with the distribution structure unchanged, every doubling of the size of the market is very likely to give the low-income earner a 100-fold gain in net income. The reason is this. Suppose the low-income earner's current income is 100% and expenditure is 99%, so net income is 1%. If innovation happens and the market doubles, the low-income earner's income becomes 200%, expenditure stays at roughly 99%, and net income becomes 101%. The net income rate has risen 101 times. To put it the other way, with prices unchanged, after innovation, the low-income earner's net income in 1 year equals 101 years of past net income. The outcome is an ideal one for the established interest and the disadvantaged interest alike. At the same time, the surge in the low-income earner's net income means a great gain in every kind of freedom across the whole of society.